Peace, love, liberty, radio.
And the walls come crashing down as the war at home reaches your town. You have no choice, it's safe and clean. We all submit to the war machine.
So, this is normally when I would be answering your questions. However, you have let me down. I hate to say it, but I have been let down, and I have no questions to answer this week as part of the Ask Me Anything. There was one question that somebody had asked me in a private message on Facebook, and the way they asked the question, I thought, like, maybe this is something... I thought that I was going to have a question for the Ask Me Anything, and this is kind of embarrassing and a little disappointing. So the question was, does it violate the non-aggression principle to eat meat? And I said, is this a question for my AMA? And the response was, what's an AMA? So, obviously, no, it was not a question for the Ask Me Anything. What had happened, and I'll just go ahead and relay the story. What had happened is a friend of this person had posted something on Facebook about being upset about all of these libertarians that eat meat in violation of the non-aggression principle. And it really depends on how one interprets the non-aggression principle. So I guess I kind of am answering a question, although it technically was not submitted for the Ask Me Anything, but I'm answering the question nonetheless. So my answer to the question is, well, first off, I have to make sure that I define non-aggression principle for anybody that does not know what it is. So the non-aggression principle is basically the premise behind libertarian thought. It's that nobody has a right to aggress against another person for any purpose whatsoever. And that there's all kinds of discussion about the nuances of what that means. And some people would take this and interpret to mean that you can't use defensive force. But it doesn't say force, it's aggression. Aggression is initiatory violence, not retaliatory violence. Secondly, as I understand the non-aggression principle, and this is one of those things that, you know, like it's up for interpretation about what it actually means, right? So as I understand it, it's only talking about aggressing against other people, other humans. It's not aggressing against animals. And now I would say that if somebody is just going out and beating their dog for the sake of beating their dog, that they are probably a horrible person, and that somebody could use defensive force to protect the dog, right? So if you see somebody just like assaulting a dog, you could go, you know, use force to prevent them from assaulting the dog. Now, it could be argued that you are then initiating the aggression against the person because you are not protecting life or property of another person. Now, if you own the dog, then that's a different story, right? Because then the dog is your property. And I'm using property in air quotes there because I realize that pets, for the most part, are viewed more as family than property. And so it's one of these sort of things to where really it depends on how you look at this to determine whether or not it is just or moral to eat an animal. So let's sort of start from where my thinking is about the initial question that was asked about, is it a violation of the non-aggression principle to eat meat? And I would say no. Further, I would say that the person posing the question, if you're taking their premise as far as what they believe, that, you should not kill a living being to eat it, then if they are eating vegetables, they are violating their own premise that you should not kill a living thing in order to get sustenance, because plants are living things. That's what plants are. So to be consistent with the thought that you can't eat meat lest you violate the non-aggression principle, then you also should not eat plants, because plants are also alive, which means that based on the premise that this person is coming from, this person being the friend of the friend, is that really the only way that you can be a consistent philosophical libertarian and abide by the non-aggression principle is to only consume dirt and water. And then you have to make sure that there are no microorganisms in the dirt or the water, because then you would be harming something, right? So it seems to be sort of a philosophy, or not really a philosophy, but an interpretation of the principle without taking it to the logical conclusion of, if you go all the way, then you can only ingest dirt and water, and that's definitely not what this person believes. So I've got a couple different wordings of the non-aggression principle, and there's one that I really like that I need to try pulling this up again, because there's a list of a bunch of different interpretations, or not interpretation, but sort of definitions. And the one that I'm thinking of, I can't find in front of me right now, but it basically says that the non-aggression principle is the belief that everything shall be legal unless you cause unjust harm to another person. And that's a really good way of looking at it, right? Because that means that as long as two people are interacting in consensual manners, then their actions should not be regulated or made illegal by any government agency. And I want to make sure that I specify this, because the story that I'm going to get into in the next segment definitely deals with consensual activities between consenting adults. And I cannot stress enough the word consensual. And what that means, and I feel as though I have to sort of define even the most basic word here to make sure that I don't wind up getting angry emails from people. So consensual essentially means as long as all parties involved consent. What does that mean? It means that nobody that's involved winds up saying, I want this to stop. It means that they are okay with the act that is happening, and they have absolutely no problems with it going on. And just to make sure that I give the proper definition, I am reading here from Merriam-Webster: to agree to do or to allow something, to give assent or approval, to be conquered in opinion or sentiment. And that is important, and I'll tell you why next. During the 2013 Porcupine Freedom Festival, Davi Barker presented an idea for a renegade psychological experiment. Since then, he has refined his idea and put his plan and research into writing. He explains, "We aim to show the world beyond a shadow of a doubt that power corrupts absolutely and corrupt authority deserves no obedience." Authoritarian Sociopathy is available from Amazon.com, all major bookstores, and now available as an audiobook.
It is the year 91,001 BCE. Witness humanity's origins in Hyperchronius, a classic role-playing game for Windows PCs with a story like no other game before. The liberty-oriented experience that is not to be missed. Go to zog.ninja to get your copy of Hypercronius today. Use the code FPP to get $1 off. Hypercronius, zog.ninja, code FPP.
You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates, like Namecheap, ExpressCoin, and Amazon, at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. Or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. That's shop.fppradio.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry. Online at fppradio.com.
So before I get into the story about consent and why consent is important and what this actually has to do with anything, because it's not just consent. So, I'm not going to be talking about, rape culture or anything. But before I get into the story from Reason.com about some celebrities that are not happy with the position of Amnesty International, I want to make sure that I tell you about something that will make you happy, at least if you like gold and or silver. Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. For over 35 years, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been making other people happy by being a trusted source for buying and selling investment-grade precious metals. They take Bitcoin for precious metal purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid in the digital currency. Call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage today for knowledgeable advice on investing and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 850-478-5270, or visit them online, rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. So the story here from Reason.com says, after a long and careful consideration of the evidence, global human rights organization Amnesty International has come to the conclusion that decriminalizing prostitution is the best way to respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of sex workers. But actress Anne Hathaway played a French whore in Les Miserables, so she feels that she has a right to talk out about the issue, too. Hathaway is one of the several high-profile actresses, including Lena Dunham and Meryl Streep, who are protesting Amnesty's draft policy on sex work, which states that all consenting sexual conduct between adults, which excludes acts that involve coercion, deception, threats, or violence, is entitled to the protection from state interference. And again, this goes back to what I was talking about with consent, by giving the definition of consent. So, consensual activities between adults would not include things that are done through coercion, deception, threats, or violence. Those are not consensual. Some would argue that the deception could be, but I lean towards, no, you're using fraud to get somebody to, quote-unquote, agree to something when it's not really informed. It's not an informed consent, right? So it's one of these sort of implied, well, I think it's this, but oh, wait, nope, it turned out being something else, so I would not agree under this condition, but I kind of already agreed, right? So, some people would sort of feel pressured into the act at that point, but they're not talking about that. They're talking about only things that are consensual between adults, and they say they, being Amnesty International, says that those should be entitled to protection from state interference. Criminalizing the sex trade actually leads to increased harassment of and violence against sex workers, according to Amnesty International, in their abuse, or rather they say that includes abuse at the hands of police. And that's not just according to Amnesty International, statistics and whatnot, data that people can look at proves what is being said here by Amnesty International. The Hollywood Reporter notes, in the past, celebrities like Jon Stewart, Madonna, and Kristen Wiig. I have no clue who Kristen Wiig is, but apparently she's a celebrity and deserves to be mentioned in the same sentence with Jon Stewart and Madonna. They have not hesitated to back Amnesty International, one of the most influential human rights watchdog groups. But stopping the state from punishing people for having sex is simply too much in Tinseltown, apparently. In response to Amnesty International's draft recommendations, which are slated for presentation in Ireland in August, a long list of celebrities have joined activist groups and religious leaders in signing a broad protest, or not broad, I have no clue where the word broad came from here. They have joined in signing a protest letter. The group, which includes actors Angela Bassett, Kevin Kline, Marcia Gay Harden, Kate Winslet, Lisa Kudrow, Chris Cooper, Allison Williams, Emily Blunt, and Emma Thompson. I have no clue who most of these people are. Is that bad? Like, what does that say about me as a person that I have no clue who most of these people are that are listed as celebrities that apparently, like, you know, they're being mentioned with Kate Winslet and Lisa Kudrow. Those and Angela Bassett are the only ones that I have heard of on this list, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Basically, you know, like, I don't watch a lot of TV and I don't watch a lot of movies. Like, I could name a bunch of the people from Game of Thrones. Like, the characters, I couldn't really tell you the actors or actresses' names for more than, like, a handful. Like, I could tell you Kit Harington is Jon Snow. And Sophie Turner is Sansa, and Macy Williams is Arya, and that's about all I've got for you. Other than, the little midget guy, Peter Dinklage. Remember, and yes, I'm sort of like ranting and doing like a line of thought sort of thing. Peter Dinklage was the angry elf in the movie Elf. Remember the movie Elf with Will Ferrell, where he thought that he was an elf and whatnot, and then he went to New York City and saw the little short midget writer guy, and he was like, "Oh, you're an angry elf, and call me an elf one more time." And yeah, so Peter Dinklage also in Game of Thrones. So like I do know a few celebrities, not many, but let's get back to the article here from Reason. So this group of people that are supposedly celebrities, many of whom I've never heard of, said that they are, quote, unquote, deeply troubled by Amnesty International's proposal to adopt a policy that calls for the decriminalization of pimps, brothel owners, and buyers of sex. In other words, they want an end demand Swedish-style policy that actually grows the number of people prosecuted for prostitution. Under such models, selling sex is decriminalized under very narrow circumstances, while penalties and enforcement efforts are ramped up in the direction of catching pimps, sex traffickers, and people who want to pay for sex. The last category, known as Johns, have been a major focus of anti-prostitution and anti-sex trafficking groups recently under the implausible theory that we can end demand for commercial sex by making the penalties for solicitation severe enough, hence eradicating prostitution entirely. And no prostitution, no sex trafficking, voila. Or at least that's the theory. Well, that's not really how the world works. Like, there have been attempts to crack down on prostitution throughout a lot of history, and, well, it's still here. There's a reason it's called the world's oldest profession. And if you have ever done a study of the history of money, and this is really interesting because I read a book a couple of years ago called I actually don't remember what the book was. The Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, I think, and it talks about, like, the origin of money was to pay the temple prostitutes. That's the history of money, is prostitution. There's more when we come back. When her plush and comfy life suddenly and unexpectedly fell apart, Brooke and her dog Cloud set out to defy the odds. If this is a man's world, as they say, living on the streets is no place for a young woman. One day she awoke in the redwood forest and realized she had become a hobo, and would ultimately come to know exactly what it means to survive. How to Be a Hobo by Brooke Willett is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
Hey, this is Michael Dean from the Freedom Fiends radio show. I've been working with computer programmer Derek Slopey to create Fiend Phone. I'm using Fiend Phone right now to talk with and record one of my co-hosts in real time. Take it, Davi.
Hey, this is Davi Barker, and I'm 1,000 miles away from Michael, but we sound like we're in the same room.
We sure do, Davi. So, Davi, please tell the nice people more about Fiend Phone.
Fiend Phone is free, open-source software that opens up a global world of possibilities for collaborative, high-quality remote voice media production, and I'm digging it.
People can try the Windows beta version of Fiend Phone right now at fiendphone.com. But we're also raising money to vastly improve Fiend Phone and vastly improve independent talk media worldwide.
So go to fiendphone.com to help out. Who will build the audio roads? We will, with your help.
That's fiendphone.com. FEENPHONE.com. Foxtrot, Echo, Echo, November, phone.com.
Fiend Phone. I never knew remote audio could be this good.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
I'll get back to telling you about some prostitution stuff in just a second. But first, I want to make sure that I tell you about something that is totally not in any way related to that. But I have to tell you anyway about Survivor Max. Survivor Max by Davi Barker tells the story of an 11-year-old boy named Max who must survive the zombie apocalypse alone in New Hampshire. The slow-moving, non-thinking lame brains swarm his home searching for living flesh. Max must apply his Porcupine Freedom Scouts training to plan his escape, but first, he must prove that he's too smart to die. Look for Survivor Max on Facebook and Amazon, or you can read Chapter 1 absolutely free at survivormax.com. That's survivormax.com. So the story here from Reason.com is talking about some people that are supposedly celebrities, many of whom I've never heard of before, that are upset that Amnesty International, a human rights organization that supports human rights and believes that, people should be free to do things without interference from government. Well, some celebrities are upset that Amnesty International wants basically governments to stop interfering in the consensual activities of people when it involves bedroom sort of things. The story here has a note from Professor Charlotta Holmström of Sweden's Malmö University and May Lynn Skilbree of the University of Oslo on the London School of Economics blog said, without a vibrant sex industry, there would be no sex trafficking. The anti-decriminalization letter states, and they cite evidence of the Swedish model claiming that it has actually worked to decrease sex work or sex trafficking in the country. And, well, actually, that's mixed with prosecution of sex workers themselves has continued more or less apace. And now here's the quote from the professors. Quote, if the seller is foreign, she is to blame and can be punished with deportation. So, yeah, in Sweden, where some of these people are, well, we need to use the Swedish model. Well, yeah, the Swedish model is not actually that great because they're still going after the people that are trying to make a living, not just people that are trying to be customers. A EU-based sex worker named Molly Smith in the New Republic recently said, widely presented as a more tolerant and pragmatic approach, the legalized model still criminalizes those sex workers who cannot or will not fulfill various bureaucratic responsibilities and therefore retain some of the worst harms of criminalization. It disproportionately excludes sex workers who are already marginalized like people who use drugs or who are undocumented. This makes their situation more precarious and also reinforces the power of unscrupulous managers. Still, the so-called Swedish model sounds feminist if you don't think about it too hard, with its theoretical emphasis on not punishing women in sex work themselves and holding pimps, brothel owners, etc. accountable. After all, if you believe the letter writers, decriminalizing these people will, quote, in effort support a system of gender apartheid. Yes, that's right. They're claiming that by decriminalizing, that means removing the criminal penalties from prostitution, that you will create gender apartheid. The article continues. It says, legally, however, the pimps, brothel owners, sex traffickers, etc. include a vast number of, you guessed it, female sex workers and former sex workers. Some teens themselves. This summer alone, there have been at least 2 U.S. cases of teen sex workers being charged with serious sex trafficking offenses for driving or recruiting friends to work for them. The very women, feminist, and religious groups are claiming to save are the ones they're not only encouraging law enforcement to crack down on, but ramping up the criminal penalties for. And as former cop and sex worker turned advocate Norma Jean Almodovar recently commented, sometimes sex workers want to work with pimps and at brothels. She says, personally, when I was working, I hired a number of different madams to provide me with safe clients. And there's a reason, and there's a longer quote here that I'll get into in just a second, and maybe she touches on it, maybe she doesn't. But there's a reason that, someone as a sex worker would want to have basically somebody that would be labeled a pimp. It's basically a manager. I've heard the term pimp called a person in a management position, and that's basically what it is. It's somebody that does the booking for you. They make sure that the clients are what you would consider to be safe. So there are some people who have very strict requirements of, I only want people that are in upper middle management that make X number of dollars a year, this, that, the other thing. Well, if you've got somebody that's doing that for you, that's booking your dates and doing these background checks, well, it saves you time, and it could actually wind up making you more money, and it is going to keep you safer, because then you're not meeting some random guy that says one thing but actually doesn't live up to whatever, and it gives you more time to actually go out and do the actual work instead of, doing paperwork. So Almodovar writes, quote, I was willing to pay them for their services, which including screening those to whom they referred me, and they also knew where I was and when I was with the client. Under the law, they are pimps too, but if I wanted to hire them and pay them for their services, what business is it of yours or the government's? Can't grown women who are sex workers have agents and managers just as people who are writers, artists, and in show business, sports, music industry, and others do? Would you think it appropriate for some young athlete to try to negotiate a contract with a sports franchise by him or herself? Do some of these young people get ripped off by a manager or agent? Yes, and when they do, they have legal recourse, which is something sex workers would like to have as well. The article here concludes, despite the celebrity letter's assertion that growing evidence suggests the catastrophic effects of decriminalization of the sex industry, New Zealand, which decriminalized everything from street prostitution to escort services, living off the proceeds of prostitution and brothels in 2003, has seen safer and better working conditions for sex workers on a number of levels, increased levels of condom use, and no increase in overall prostitution levels or instances of criminal sex trafficking. Kudos, writes Reason, kudos to Amnesty International for embracing an evidence-based harm reduction-centered, rights-respecting approach to sex work instead of the empty rhetoric of saving women and children by using state violence against them. And I could not say it better myself, and hopefully, because Amnesty International does have a lot of influence in the political spheres, So hopefully after they wind up coming out with the actual policy that they are supporting, they come out with that next month. Hopefully some governments around the globe wind up adopting this, and you'll wind up seeing safer conditions for people and fewer people getting arrested. And that is best for everybody, right? This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.